Now, those who follow me are well aware that my wife of 25 years passed away from alcohol use disorder a little over 5 years ago. And a lot of my page, not all of it by any means, is really talking about the last 6, 7, 8 years of her life, where she was a late stage 3 and into stage 4 alcoholic, where everything was about getting alcohol, consuming it, and recovering from it, getting into problems with legal problems with the jail, with her DUIs, going to rehabs and detoxes 7 times, first responders at our house on a regular basis because she would be detoxing or just be just out of control emotionally. So I tell a lot about that, and people ask me as a result, well, how did you stay for 25 years? How could you do it? And the truth is, it was not like that for 25 years. In fact, it was very intermittent until the last few years, where it got into the later stages. And I can really relate back to when she did have her bariatric surgery and she had what's called a gastric sleeve bypass. But I really want to get into the early years a little bit more and kind of discover how we met each other and really how it all started, how our story started. Now, in the memoir, Amanda, A Cautionary Tale of Alcoholism, originally, this is a 320-page book. Originally, I had written 625 pages. It was quite a bit in more depth, and a lot of it went more into the early years and in the development of how we met and our characters and how we met. And a lot of that was taken out because, just to produce a book of that size, certainly a memoir, it becomes very cumbersome. So I'm going to go over a little bit more on this page about our early years and continue the story of how we started, because there's far more positive in those 25 years than there was negative. And I also want people to understand that potentially this could happen to anybody given the right circumstances and being involved in the perfect storm of family culture, hereditary issue, trauma, peer pressure, and just consistency of drinking. This is the road you're going to go through. And I tell these stories so that if you see it in a loved one or recognize it in yourself, maybe it's time to do something about it. And I hope this page and this video will help with that. And really, before I get started, real quick, I have a complete coaching program, which is really designed to help not just the alcoholic, but the family itself. Click on the link above. It's in the link tree in the bio. The call is called the Breakthrough Call. It takes about 45 minutes. We're going to do a deep dive into what's going on with you and your family. The call is free. The course is not. But I'm looking for people who are committed to changing their life, reinventing themselves, and putting themselves on a path of sustainable sobriety. Make a call. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Now, the first time I met Amanda was actually, I think I was about 30 years old. So it was quite some time ago. I'm 63 now, so 33 years ago. And I met her in the corporate environment. We were both insurance agents. We worked for a company called FHP, which no longer exists. We sold for Medicare insurance. And I had worked there for a number of years. I was one of the top salesmen in the company. And we had like a leaderboard. And there was two offices. She was on one office and I was on the other, and we became friends through other mutual friends. But I remember the first time I saw her was on the leaderboard, and at the time her last name was Dingle, D-I-N-G-L-E, which is kind of a funny name. Her name was Mandy Dingle, Amanda Dingle, but she went by Mandy Dingle, which I thought was kind of catchy. And she was a new rep, and we always, you always have to, give new reps a hard time, especially when you're established. But I remember seeing her name, and it kept going up and up in the board. I think she was like top on the board after only been there about 90 days. And I didn't realize she was in the room, and I was talking to another rep looking at the board. I'm going, Dingle? Who's Dingle? What the frick kind of name is Dingle? And she was like on the other side of a divider, and she stuck her head up and she said, I'm Dingle. You got a problem with that name, Buster? And that's the first time I met her, which is pretty funny. She was very feisty, always put together. I mean, her hair, makeup. She had graduated from University of California at Santa Barbara. She was in fashion merchandise, so she was very much into clothes, makeup, that kind of thing. She looked like a model. She had these beautiful piercing blue eyes, beautiful blonde hair. She's a very nice person as well. That was the first time I met her. And how we went on a first date, I'll tell in the next segment. But it was a funny beginning. I think it's the way all relationships should start, with meeting someone that way. The funny thing, I think she started in 1990, and I'd been there since 1987. I'd been there a good 3.5 years before she started. So I was kind of established, but we just kind of met through mutual friends. I mean, we'd go to, the groups of us would go to lunch. There was restaurants across the street if we weren't out in the field. And, sometimes we'd just be sitting at the same table, and it was always, it was just, we were just friends. It was just a group of friends that got together, and that's really how you got to know people. But our first date, really, which we didn't set up, was our friends up in Big Bear. There was a thing called an Oktoberfest, and everybody said that they're going to go up there. And it was supposed to, I thought it was like a big event. I thought they closed the streets down and stuff. But we went up there. I went up there myself, and I was supposed to meet some friends. And I got there, and the event was pretty much over. And it was just contained in one building. And I kind of stuck my head on going, this is it? This is supposed to be Oktoberfest? And it was just a very small thing. And none of my friends showed up. I was like, what is going on here? I mean, Big Bear was like 2 hours away to get there. And I decided to walk back to my car. I was just going to go home. And walking across the parking lot was Amanda. And I was like, Amanda, what are you doing up here? And she said the same thing I did. Well, she's supposed to meet her friends up here, but none of them really made it up here. I'm like, we kind of looked at each other like, are we being set up here? And we were. Her friends kind of set her up to be there and set me up to be there. And we ended up, I remember we walked into town, and of course, we went to a bar to have a few drinks. I mean, it's like the first time I'd met her. And I think we got something to eat, and that ended up being our first date. And I think that day I asked her, she's really into animals, and the next day I asked her that the following Saturday that I had got a new puppy, and he'd been neutered, and I was going to pick him up on Saturday, and if she was interested in going to the shelter to pick up my dog. And she was like, oh my God, I can't think of anything better to do, and that was our first date. We was actually picking up my dog Chester at the time, who was a big golden lab, crazy dog. That's another story. But that was the first time we really kind of got together, and our first date was picking up our dog Chester. Yeah, and then really to continue the story, our first date was, like I said, the following Saturday, the next weekend. I went to get my dog, and she was very excited. I remember she came over to my house. I had just bought a house. I was bought my first house when I was 29 in Highland, California. It was a relatively new house, just a simple 3-bedroom, 2-bath room, but it was perfect for me. I was, I was so young then. It's funny. She came over after we picked up Chester. Chester had he was the cutest little puppy. He was only about 8-9 weeks old at the time. Big ears, big nose, just the cutest little thing. We went to my house, and she immediately gave him a bath in my kitchen sink. She just had to clean them all up, and oh my God, she just really made Chester her own. I think she was more interested in the dog at the time than myself, but we used to laugh about it. But she just loved animals, and she had her own dog called Sammy, which was probably, her dog was probably 3 or 4 years old at that time. But Sammy was a very intelligent Australian Shepherd dog, where Chester was the exact opposite. He was this big, lanky, would get excited and run into the wall kind of a dog, chase his own tail around, just super hyper excitable dog. And the two of those dogs became our family. Eventually, we would go back and forth. She lived in Canyon Lake. She was renting the house from her dad. Canyon Lake was a good hour and 15 minutes at the time away. And we would eventually, when we were together, we would go back and forth between the houses. And eventually, her house was a lot bigger, and she had a boat on the water. And eventually we bought that house from her dad. But before that, for the first couple of years, we were going back and forth. And eventually, I think we got tired of going back and forth. In fact, I only lived in my house for about, 4 or 5 months. I just bought this house, and I ended up moving in with Amanda in Canyon Lake after, 3 or 4 months because I just got tired of going back and forth. Funny times, funny times. I think another reason why I moved into the Canyon Lake house after only 3 or 4 months was because my dog Chester, you couldn't leave him alone. I remember I used to put him in the backyard, and I would have a collar on him, and we'd have to tie him down really in the back because he would just jump the fence. And I remember one time I came home and the dog wasn't there, and apparently the neighbor got him. He had chewed through his leather strap that held him down. He had jumped over the fence, and he's still just a puppy, and he scaled a 6-foot wall fence, and when he went out on the other side, he got stuck in the lats of the fence, and he was hanging himself, and I guess he was barking his head off, and one of the neighbors came and got him. He'd actually hung himself by jumping over the fence. And then I realized, after that, I couldn't leave him alone, so we decided just to get our 2 dogs together and make it a family, I guess. And I ended up living in that house for almost 11 years, because we got married in that house, and those were some of the best times in our 30s. I lived there from the time I was, I think, 31 or 32 until I was 42, and by then we'd had our son Griffin, and those were definitely some of the best years of our life at Canyon Lake. And I remember after I moved in, Amanda didn't want her parents to know that I was living there. And her father used to just come over all the time. I mean, I had met them before a couple times. I'd been to dinner at their house in Irvine. Her parents lived in Irvine, which is in Orange County. Again, another good hour away. But her father came over one time. It was on a weekend. And I remember he walked in the house, and we were just talking or something. I can't remember what we were doing. It was in the middle of the day. And he walked in the bedroom, and I had a suitcase in there. And he came back out. He was just messing with us. He knew I was living there. He goes, "Huh, I see a suitcase in there. What's going on? What's up with the suitcase?" If you know, he was kind of funny that way. He would kind of just mess with you. Say, "Yeah, what do you think, Dave?" But that was fun times when her father would come over. And we actually became good friends with her dad back then. Before all the craziness happened later on. But we used to have parties back then. We had a lot of friends. We had a lot of other insurance agents, that would come over. And there's a lot of alcohol in that environment. That's one thing I really wanted to get into, is that there is a lot of alcohol in the corporate America. And whenever we had parties, because people loved to come out to our house, because we had a house on the water. We had a pontoon boat that would fit 11 people, and we called it the party boat. We'd go out, and everybody would have wine and beer, and we'd tool around the lake for a couple hours. We had no problem getting people to come over to our house. And this is before a lot of our friends had kids. But within a few years of that, people started having kids, and everybody started growing up by the time you're in your mid-30s. But that's kind of how it started. And Amanda, even in that era, she drank on a kind of a regular basis. It was a glass of wine here or there. It wasn't something that I consciously even thought about it, because you certainly don't know what you don't know. And so many people have asked me, well, didn't you understand that when you first met her? Why'd you marry her if you knew that she had this drinking problem? And that's absolutely ridiculous. Nobody has a crystal ball. You don't know that somebody's couple glasses of wine a night is going to turn into a stage 4 alcoholic who runs through your house and has to go to 7, rehabs and gets DUIs, 20 or 30 years into the future. You can't know that. And I did not grow up in an environment where drinking was normalized. My father might have had a drink once in a while. My mother never drank. My older brother and sister were not drinkers. And my dad's dad drank, but it wasn't really something that we talked about or even thought about. There just wasn't a whole lot of it. And in Amanda's family, honestly, when we got together, they all brought red wine and white wine. Her sister and my brother-in-law, my brother-in-law didn't drink. He was kind of like me, just a normal drinker, but her sister certainly had issues with it. And her father had issues with it when they were younger, when Amanda and her sister were younger. And her Her father's mother actually died from it in her 80s. Strangely enough, she lived that long, but she definitely died of alcohol use disorder. So it ran on the family. But, again, back then I had no idea, no understanding, no realization of what I was getting involved with. And really, one important subject that I want to go over is that, Amanda was drinking before I met her. That this is the thing. I mean, kind of in a regular basis. And I think, she had already had, and this is why I get into it, she already grew up in a family culture where drinking was normalized. She definitely had a hereditary disposition because it affected, on her dad's side, almost straight down, everybody in that line, honestly, has serious drinking issues. So it was hereditary. ADH1B and ALDH2 on a chromosomal level definitely affected that family. And then, again, I get into in the book, but she had, some trauma when she was 16. When she was 16 years old, 15 years before I met her, she had a boyfriend who was 19, 3 years older than her, and unfortunately she had gotten pregnant at the time, and her parents really dissolved the relationship, made her, let me put it this way, she wasn't allowed to keep the baby, and they ended up sending her to a boarding school, all girls boarding school, 500 miles north, closer to closer up towards San Jose area. Not quite that high, but up in that area. And it wasn't just all the trauma that went on there, but it was just being kind of kicked out of the family, I think emotionally really scarred her for the rest of her life. I think it was something she never got over. The fact that she did have to, abort a baby at 16, I'm sure was very traumatic. This may be too much to share, and I've never really shared it. But it's important to understand where it comes from. I do share it in the memoir, and I delve with it more into the memoir. But that was really the groundwork of the reasons of why Amanda had so much emotional trauma. I think the rejection from her parents and from her family, and being shunned and actually physically being removed from the family the last 2 years of her high school career. And she never really lived at home again, because she finished her last 2 years of high school and an all-girls school, and then she ended up going to college and never really lived back with her parents again. And it was a separation and a trauma that really set the stage for the rest of her life. And I really speak about this because when I first met her, the one thing I didn't really understand is, she would cry on my chest at night to fall asleep, still talking about this event and the rejection that she felt from her parents, and how much trauma that her parents had caused her. And this is 15 years later. And to really go into that kind of depth. So she was a very emotional in that aspect. She was a very strong person, but I think feelings of rejection haunted her, and it's one of the reasons why she hid her emotions and that trauma and the stress of that rejection in her life, and she hid it in bottles of wine. And I don't think it was a conscious thing. I think it slowly crept up on her, and I think those couple glasses of wine turned into bottles of wine, and then they turned into bigger bottles of wine. And coming from myself, who's a normalized drinker, who didn't grow up in a family culture where drinking was normalized, I didn't really understand it. I just thought as part of her personality, part of her family culture, and part of her makeup. I didn't like it. But in the first 15 years, it really wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't getting into the way of things. She wasn't crashing into the car. She didn't have health issues. That came later. But knowing what I know now, everything that was going on way back then, 20 years before her downfall, she had created the ground floor of what would become her demise in 2020. And understand that. And I tell this story because it's so important. It doesn't start it doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow progression. It can happen generally in someone's high school years, and by the time they're in their 40s and 50s, if they're still drinking on a regular basis, they're in serious trouble. And for many people, if they haven't already succumbed, they're knocking on heaven's door. And really, some of the last things I want to say about this, I mean, we lived in that home from 1992 until 2002. So it was about 10 years from the time I was 30 until I was 40, really. 29 to 40 in that era. And those were some of the best years. I mean, we had a wonderful life. We both worked for companies. I eventually left FHP and went to another company called Prudential. And sold for them for a number of years. And Amanda came over there. I mean, we had very good salaries. We had a very good lifestyle because we worked out of our house. We made phone calls, and our territory was localized. So we didn't, we had a very good existence for many years. And maybe that was some of the problems because, money was rolling in. It wasn't really an issue. We had time, and we lived essentially in a resort area, in Canyon Lake at the time. And I think it all contributed to Amanda's downfall because it's kind of the perfect storm. Living in a resort area, I mean, the last thing we had this huge wraparound deck that was probably 1,200 square feet, just the back deck, and you'd walk out onto the deck, and we had a lower section where you went down to get into the boat, and you could watch boats go by, and it was a natural thing to, grab a glass of wine for Amanda and sit on the back deck after work and watch the boats go by. It was a wonderful life, but that kind of consistency and that kind of regularity poses a lot of problems. Recognize it in yourself if you're going down that road. It's so easy to slip into this, again, a couple glasses here, a couple glasses there, and before you know it, you're binge drinking on the weekend, and that turns into a serious, serious problem. Recognize that, and I hope Amanda's story and my story have helped you and help you open your eyes to that fact. I really want to get into the early years, to be honest with you. I think myself included is getting tired of kind of the doom and gloom, if you follow me. There's only so much you can talk about that, and I'll go back to that eventually because that's really what the page is about. But it's important to start and talk about the beginnings. And some of that is actually in the book, The Memoir Amanda, A Cautionary Tale of Alcoholism. Again, you can find this on the link in the link tree. It's available on my website. There's a link there for the international. It's available anywhere in the world. You can also purchase it on Amazon in hard copy, and then the ebook is also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and the Apple website. This is going to be the first phase of the early years. I'm going to make a whole series of these, maybe 6 or 7. And again, thanks so much for listening.